Imagine opening your pantry 10 years from now and finding food that is still usable. No refrigerator, no freezer, no complicated equipment. Just simple foods that can remain useful for an incredibly long time when they're stored correctly. That's the idea behind today's list. But before we begin, there's an important distinction. Very few foods can literally be called never expiring. Even foods famous for extremely long shelf lives can eventually change in quality, especially when they're exposed to moisture, heat, oxygen, light, or pests. So when we say never expire, we're talking about foods that can remain usable for exceptionally long periods under proper storage conditions. And some of them can last for decades. Others can remain useful almost indefinitely when stored correctly. That's why these foods have earned a reputation among preppers, homesteaders, and long-term food storage enthusiasts. But here's the part many people get wrong. Stockpiling doesn't mean buying the biggest quantity possible. It means choosing foods that fit your household. Foods you actually eat. Foods that can be stored safely. And foods that can work with other ingredients to create real meals. Because a giant pile of food that nobody wants to eat isn't much of a preparedness plan. A smarter approach is to build your supply gradually. Buy during normal grocery trips. Rotate what you store. Use older products first. And replace them as you go. That way, your pantry remains useful instead of becoming a forgotten room full of expired packages. Today we're counting down 15 foods that are famous for exceptionally long storage potential. Some are incredibly simple. Some may already be sitting in your kitchen. And a few may. Number 15. Apple cider vinegar. Starting at number 15 is a pantry staple that can remain useful for a remarkably long time. Apple cider vinegar. Vinegar is one of those products that has been used for generations because of its acidity and versatility. And when stored properly, commercially produced vinegar can have an exceptionally long storage life. Apple cider vinegar can be used in cooking, salad dressings, marinades, sauces, and countless household recipes. That versatility makes it more valuable than a food that can only be used in one specific meal. A bottle can sit in your pantry for a long time without requiring refrigeration while unopened. Over time, you may notice changes in color or the appearance of harmless sediment. Those changes don't necessarily mean the vinegar has become unusable. The most important thing is proper storage. Keep the bottle tightly closed. Store it in a cool, dry location away from direct sunlight. And follow the manufacturer's storage instructions. If you're buying vinegar specifically for long-term preparedness, choose a product your household already uses. There's no advantage to storing 10 bottles of something nobody likes. Apple cider vinegar can also help add flavor to simple pantry meals. A small amount can brighten beans, vegetables, salads, and sauces. And because you generally use only a little at a time, one bottle can last a surprisingly long time. Check the bottle before purchasing and make sure the seal is intact. Once opened, keep it tightly closed between uses. Apple cider vinegar earns the number 15 spot because it's versatile, compact, inexpensive, and known for an exceptionally long storage life when properly handled. And the next food on our list is even simpler. A basic ingredient that almost every kitchen uses, but that can remain useful for an incredibly long time. Number 14. White sugar. At number 14 is one of the simplest foods you can stockpile. White sugar. Under suitable storage conditions, granulated white sugar can remain usable for an extremely long time. The biggest enemy isn't necessarily time. It's moisture. When sugar absorbs moisture, it can harden into a solid block. That doesn't automatically mean it's spoiled, but it can become difficult to measure and use. That's why proper storage matters. Keep sugar in a cool, dry location. Protect it from humidity. And store it in a clean, airtight food-safe container if the original packaging isn't suitable for long-term storage. Sugar can also attract pests if it's not properly sealed. So a secure container is important. White sugar has another major advantage. It's incredibly versatile. You can use it in baking, sweeten drinks, make sauces, prepare preserves, or simply add a small amount to recipes that need sweetness. And because sugar is so familiar, you don't need to learn complicated recipes just to use it. For long-term preparedness, you can store reasonable quantities and rotate them through normal cooking. If the sugar becomes hard, breaking it apart may restore its usefulness. But prevention is much easier. Keep moisture away from it in the first place. When buying sugar, there's usually no reason to purchase an enormous quantity at once. Start with what your household normally uses. Then gradually build a reserve. White sugar earns the number 14 spot because it's inexpensive, highly versatile, and can remain usable for an exceptionally long time when protected from moisture and contamination. And the next item is another pantry staple with an impressive reputation for long-term storage. Number 13. Pure maple syrup. At number 13 is a food that many people don't think of as a survival staple. Pure maple syrup. It may be a treat rather than a basic necessity, but it can be surprisingly useful in a long-term pantry. Maple syrup can add sweetness and flavor to foods that might otherwise become repetitive. Use it on pancakes. Add it to oatmeal. Mix it into certain baked goods. Use it in sauces. Or add a small amount to other recipes. That versatility makes it useful beyond breakfast. However, there is an important difference between pure maple syrup and other pancake syrups. They aren't the same product. Pure maple syrup has different storage characteristics and should be handled according to the manufacturer's instructions. An unopened container can have a relatively long shelf life when stored properly. But once opened, refrigeration is generally recommended. That's an important detail if you're planning a long-term pantry. Don't simply assume that because something lasts a long time unopened, it can be left at room temperature forever after opening. Keep unopened syrup in a cool, dry place according to the label. Inspect the container before use. And if you've opened it, follow the storage instructions carefully. Maple syrup also takes up relatively little space compared with the amount of flavor it provides. A small amount can make basic foods feel much more enjoyable. And that matters during an extended emergency. Food isn't only about calories. Morale and variety matter too. Pure maple syrup earns the number 13 spot because it provides long-lasting sweetness and flavor while taking up relatively little pantry space. And the next item is something even more basic. A mineral that your household needs and that can remain stable for an incredibly long time. Number 12. Salt. At number 12 is one of the most important and overlooked pantry staples. Salt. Simple table salt can remain usable for an exceptionally long time when kept dry and protected from contamination. It doesn't provide significant calories. It isn't a complete food, but that doesn't make it unimportant. Salt is essential for cooking. It can improve the flavor of bland foods. And it can help you create variety from simple ingredients. Imagine eating the same basic grains and vegetables for several weeks. Without seasoning, meals can quickly become boring. A little salt can make a major difference. Salt also has a long history of being used in food preservation. However, don't assume that having table salt means you can safely preserve any food at home. Food preservation requires specific tested methods, correct salt concentrations, and appropriate procedures. Improvised preservation can be unsafe. For everyday pantry storage, the main concern is moisture. Keep salt dry. If moisture gets into the container, salt can clump. Clumping doesn't necessarily mean the salt has spoiled, but it can make it harder to use. An airtight food-safe container can help protect it from humidity and contamination. Different salts also have different uses. Table salt, kosher salt, pickling salt, sea salt, and other varieties aren't always interchangeable in recipes. Choose the type your household actually uses. Salt earns the number 12 spot because it's inexpensive, compact, essential for cooking, and capable of remaining usable for an extremely long time when stored properly. And the next food is something that can provide sweetness, energy, and incredible storage potential. Number 11. Honey. At number 11 is one of the most famous long storage foods in the world. Honey. Pure honey has an extraordinary reputation for longevity. Under suitable conditions, properly stored honey can remain usable for an exceptionally long time. That's because its natural characteristics make it difficult for many microorganisms to grow in it. But don't misunderstand that to mean storage doesn't matter. It does. Honey should be kept tightly sealed and protected from moisture. Store it in a cool, dry location away from direct sunlight. Over time, you may notice the honey becoming cloudy or developing crystals. That's called crystallization. And crystallized honey isn't automatically spoiled. It's a natural change that can occur as honey ages. If you want it to become more liquid again, gentle warming can help. Avoid overheating it. A simple warm water bath can be enough to soften crystallized honey. Honey is also incredibly versatile. You can use it to sweeten oatmeal. Add it to tea. Spread it on bread. Use it in baking. Or add a small amount to sauces and other recipes. That means you're storing both sweetness and flavor. One important safety reminder. Honey should never be given to children under 1 year of age because of the risk of infant botulism. For everyone else, it can be a remarkably useful pantry staple. When purchasing honey for long-term storage, look at the ingredients and choose a product that fits your needs. Pure honey is particularly attractive for long-term storage because it can remain useful for a very long time when properly sealed and stored. Honey earns the number 11 spot because it combines long storage potential with calories, sweetness, and versatility. And now we're entering the top 10. The next food is one that can stay useful for an incredibly long time while taking up very little space. Number 10. Baking soda. We're entering the top 10. At number 10 is something that may already be sitting in your kitchen. Baking soda. Technically, baking soda isn't a food you would sit down and eat by itself. But it is a useful pantry staple with a very long storage potential when kept dry and properly sealed. Its main culinary role is as a leavening ingredient in certain recipes. It can help baked goods rise when combined with an appropriate acid. That makes it useful when you're storing basic baking ingredients for the long term. But baking soda can also have many household uses outside cooking. That's another reason preppers may want a supply on hand. When stored properly, dry baking soda can remain stable for a long time. The biggest concern is moisture. If water gets into the package, the powder can clump and become difficult to measure. Keep it sealed in a dry location. For food use, make sure you're using a product intended for culinary purposes and keep it away from household chemicals or contaminants. Another important point. Baking soda doesn't necessarily remain at peak effectiveness forever. Over very long periods, its performance as a leavening agent can decline. So if you're storing it for baking, periodically test or replace your supply rather than assuming it will work perfectly decades later. You can also rotate it through normal household use. That way, your stored supply stays fresh enough for practical purposes. Baking soda earns the number 10 spot because it's inexpensive, compact, versatile, and useful in both cooking and everyday household tasks. And now we're moving into the final 9. The next item is something that can add flavor to meals and has an impressive reputation for long-term stability. Number 9. Distilled white vinegar. At number 9 is one of the simplest and most reliable pantry staples you can keep. Distilled white vinegar. If you want an ingredient with an exceptionally long storage life, vinegar deserves attention. Its acidity makes it naturally resistant to many forms of spoilage, and commercially produced distilled white vinegar can remain stable for a very long time when stored properly. You can use it in cooking, salad dressings, marinades, sauces, pickling recipes that follow tested procedures, and countless everyday meals. It can also add a sharp flavor to otherwise bland foods. A small amount can completely change the taste of beans, vegetables, salads, and sauces. That makes it especially useful when you're relying on a limited number of pantry staples. Storage is simple. Keep the bottle tightly closed. Protect it from extreme temperatures and direct sunlight. And follow the manufacturer's instructions. Over time, you may notice minor changes in appearance. That doesn't necessarily mean the vinegar has spoiled. But if the product has an unusual smell, visible contamination, or damaged packaging, don't use it. And remember, not every vinegar product has the same storage characteristics. Distilled white vinegar is particularly well suited to long-term pantry storage because of its simple composition and high acidity. If you're buying it for preparedness, consider purchasing several smaller bottles rather than one enormous container. That can make rotation and handling easier. Distilled white vinegar earns the number 9 spot because it's inexpensive, versatile, compact, and capable of remaining useful for an exceptionally long time. And now we're getting closer to the final 5. The next food is one of the most basic ingredients in the kitchen. And when stored correctly, it can remain useful for decades. Number 8. Cornstarch. We're now at number 8. And this is one of those pantry ingredients that most people don't think about until they suddenly need it. Cornstarch. Cornstarch is a fine white powder commonly used to thicken soups, sauces, gravies, puddings, and other recipes. It doesn't look like a survival food, but that's exactly why it can be useful in a long-term pantry. When you're working with a limited number of ingredients, simple cooking staples become much more valuable. A little cornstarch can transform a thin sauce into something thicker and more satisfying. It can help create gravies, improve certain desserts, and give homemade meals a better texture. Storage is straightforward, but moisture is the enemy. Keep cornstarch in a cool, dry place. Make sure the container is tightly sealed, and protect it from pantry pests. If moisture gets inside, the powder can clump and lose its usefulness. When purchasing cornstarch for long-term storage, check the package and choose a product intended for food use. Don't confuse it with other powdered household products. You can also rotate cornstarch through everyday cooking. That makes it easy to maintain a fresh supply without having to throw anything away. One important point: cornstarch doesn't provide significant protein or other major nutrients. It's primarily a cooking ingredient, so it shouldn't replace actual staple foods in your emergency pantry. Instead, think of it as a small ingredient that increases the usefulness of the foods you already have. Cornstarch earns the number 8 spot because it's inexpensive, compact, versatile, and can remain usable for a long time when protected from moisture and contamination. And now we're entering the top 7. The next item is something that can provide both flavor and an important cooking function. Number 7. Whole black peppercorns. We're now at number 7. And this is a tiny pantry item that can make an enormous difference to the flavor of stored food. Whole black peppercorns. Imagine having plenty of rice, beans, vegetables, grains, and other staples. But every meal tastes almost identical. That can become one of the biggest challenges of long-term food storage. Seasonings help solve that problem. Whole peppercorns are especially useful because they can retain their flavor longer than pre-ground pepper when stored properly. You can grind them when needed, add them to soups, season vegetables, use them with meat, or simply add a small amount to everyday recipes. They take up very little space. A small container can provide a lot of flavor. And because you only need a small amount at a time, one supply can last a long time. For the best storage, keep whole peppercorns in an airtight container. Protect them from moisture, heat, and direct sunlight. A cool, dry pantry is ideal. The quality of spices can gradually decline even when they remain safe to consume. That's why rotation is still useful. Don't assume a container will taste exactly the same after decades. Instead, use older spices in normal cooking and replace them periodically. When buying peppercorns for preparedness, choose a product your household actually enjoys. You can also store a simple manual pepper grinder. That gives you a way to use whole peppercorns even if electricity isn't available. Whole black peppercorns earn the number 7 spot because they're compact, versatile, and can add a huge amount of flavor to basic stored foods. And now we're down to the final 6. The next food is one of the most important ingredients for anyone planning to bake, cook, or make filling meals from scratch. Number 6. Dry corn. We're now in the top 6. At number 6 is a simple grain that can become surprisingly versatile when stored correctly. Dry corn. This isn't the same thing as canned corn or fresh corn. We're talking about properly dried whole corn or corn kernels intended for food use. When kept dry and protected from moisture and pests, properly stored dry corn can remain usable for a very long time. and it can be transformed into several different foods. Depending on the type of corn and how it's processed, you can use it for cornmeal, corn flour, corn porridge, or other traditional preparations. That makes dry corn more than just another grain sitting in a container. It's a basic ingredient that can become something completely different. However, long-term storage requires more care than simply putting corn in a kitchen cabinet. Moisture is a major enemy. Insects and rodents can also damage stored grains. For extended storage, use clean, food-grade airtight containers designed for dry food storage. Protect the grain from humidity, heat, and pests. If you're using oxygen absorbers or other long-term storage methods, follow established food storage guidance and make sure the container and packaging are appropriate for the product. It's also important to identify the type of corn you're storing. Not every variety is interchangeable. Some are intended for popping. Others are better suited to grinding or cooking. Choose a food product appropriate for your intended use. And remember, dry corn requires preparation. You'll need water and a suitable cooking method. So if you're preparing for a power outage, your emergency plan should include safe water and a way to cook your stored grains. Dry corn earns the number 6 spot because it can be stored for a very long time under suitable conditions and can become several different useful foods. And now we're down to the final 5. The next item is one of the most basic ingredients in any kitchen, and it can remain useful for an incredibly long time when stored correctly. Number 5. Dried beans. We're now in the top 5. At number 5 is one of the classic foods associated with long-term storage. Dried beans, pinto beans, black beans, navy beans, kidney beans, and many other varieties can be stored for years when kept under appropriate conditions. The key word is dry. Moisture is one of the biggest enemies of long-term bean storage. If the beans stay dry, protected from pests, and stored in suitable containers, they can remain usable for a remarkably long time. Dried beans also have another major advantage. They are incredibly versatile. You can make soups, stews, bean dishes, chili, side dishes, or combine them with other stored staples to create complete meals. They provide protein, carbohydrates, fiber, and other nutrients. That makes them much more useful than simply storing foods that provide calories. However, there is one important difference between newly purchased dried beans and beans that have been stored for many years. Older beans can become harder to cook. They may take significantly longer to soften. In some cases, extremely old beans may remain edible but never return to the texture you expect. That's why proper storage and rotation still matter. Don't simply put beans in a container and forget about them for decades. Use them. Learn how your household likes to prepare them. And replace older supplies when necessary. For long-term storage, keep dried beans in appropriate food-grade airtight containers. Protect them from moisture, heat, insects, and rodents. If you're using specialized long-term storage methods, follow established food storage guidance. And always cook dried beans properly. Some varieties, particularly kidney beans, contain naturally occurring compounds that can cause illness if the beans are not prepared correctly. Follow safe cooking instructions rather than eating improperly cooked dried beans. Dried beans earn the number 5 spot because they're affordable, nutritious, versatile, and capable of remaining useful for years when properly stored. And now we're down to the final 4. The next food is something so simple that most people already have it in their kitchen. Number 4. Dried lentils. We're down to the final 4. At number 4 is another dry staple that can become incredibly valuable in a long-term pantry. Dried lentils. Lentils are one of the easiest legumes to prepare. Unlike many dried beans, they generally don't require a long soaking period before cooking. That can make them particularly useful when you're trying to conserve time and cooking fuel. You can turn lentils into soup. Make a simple stew. Combine them with vegetables. Serve them with grains. Or season them and eat them as a standalone side dish. They also provide plant-based protein, fiber, and other nutrients. That's important when you're building a pantry designed to support your household for an extended period. Storage is relatively straightforward. Keep dried lentils in a cool, dry location. Protect them from moisture and pests. For longer-term storage, appropriate airtight food-grade containers can provide additional protection. You may also use established long-term storage techniques when suitable for the product. But remember, even though dried lentils can remain usable for years, older legumes can sometimes take longer to cook. That's another reason rotation is valuable. Use some of your stored lentils in normal meals. Then replace what you use. This keeps your supply familiar and prevents food from sitting untouched indefinitely. When purchasing, choose varieties your household enjoys. Brown lentils, green lentils, red lentils. Different varieties can behave differently during cooking. Red lentils, for example, tend to break down more quickly and can be useful for soups and curries. Dried lentils earn the number 4 spot because they're affordable, nutritious, easy to cook compared with many dried legumes, and capable of long storage when properly protected. And now we're down to the final 3. The next food is one of the simplest long-term staples you can put in your pantry. Number 3. Dry pasta. We're down to the final 3. At number 3 is one of the easiest foods to store and one of the most versatile ingredients in a pantry. Dry pasta. Spaghetti, macaroni, penne, rotini, and countless other shapes can remain useful for a long time when kept dry and protected from pests. Pasta doesn't require refrigeration while unopened. It takes up relatively little space, and it can become the foundation for dozens of different meals. You can combine it with dried beans, canned vegetables, shelf-stable sauces, seasonings, or other ingredients you have available. That's what makes pasta such a practical stockpile food. It doesn't have to be eaten the same way every time. You can change the sauce, change the seasoning, add different vegetables, or combine it with different proteins. That variety becomes increasingly important during an extended emergency. Storage is simple. Keep dry pasta in a cool, dry location. Protect it from moisture, and make sure pantry pests can't reach it. If the original package isn't sturdy enough for your storage environment, an appropriate airtight food container can provide additional protection. But there's one thing people sometimes forget. Pasta needs water and heat. If you're preparing for a power outage or long-term emergency, you should also think about how you're going to cook it. Having a shelf full of dry pasta doesn't help much if you have no safe way to boil water. So pair your food storage plan with a safe cooking method and adequate water. Also remember that long shelf life doesn't mean perfect quality forever. Over very long periods, texture and flavor can change. That's why rotation remains the smartest strategy. Use your older packages first and replace them. Dry pasta earns the number 3 spot because it's inexpensive, versatile, lightweight, and capable of remaining useful for years when properly stored. And now we're down to the final 2. The next food is one of the most important staples in long-term food storage. Number 2. White rice. We're down to the final 2. At number 2 is one of the most recognizable long-term storage staples. White rice. It's inexpensive, versatile, easy to combine with other foods, and when stored properly, it can remain usable for a very long time. White rice is particularly attractive for long-term storage because it contains less oil than brown rice. That means it generally has a much longer storage potential under suitable conditions. You can use rice as the foundation for countless meals. Combine it with beans. Serve it with vegetables. Add seasonings. Mix it with canned or shelf-stable proteins. Or use it in soups and other dishes. That flexibility is important. You aren't storing one specific meal. You're storing an ingredient that can become many different meals. For long-term storage, however, packaging matters enormously. The rice needs to stay dry. It needs protection from insects and rodents. And for extended storage, an appropriate airtight, food-grade container can provide much better protection than a thin original package. Some long-term storage methods also use oxygen absorbers. If you choose that approach, follow established food storage guidance and use products specifically intended for dry food storage. Store the rice in a cool, dry, dark location. Avoid areas where temperature and humidity fluctuate significantly. And remember that white rice still needs to be cooked. You'll need safe water and a reliable way to heat it. That means food storage should always be connected to your broader preparedness plan. Water, cooking fuel, basic cookware, and safe food preparation are just as important as the food itself. White rice earns the number 2 spot because it's affordable, highly versatile, and can remain useful for a remarkably long time when properly packaged and stored. And now we've reached number 1. The final food on our list has earned an almost legendary reputation for long-term storage. Number 1. Wheat berries. We've reached number 1. And this final food is one of the most powerful staples you can keep for long-term food storage. Wheat berries. These are whole, intact wheat kernels that haven't been ground into flour. And that's important, because keeping the entire grain intact can help preserve it for much longer than many processed wheat products when it's stored correctly. Wheat berries can become much more than just another container sitting in your pantry. You can grind them into fresh flour. Use that flour for bread. Make homemade tortillas. Prepare pancakes. Bake simple breads. Or use the whole kernels in certain cooked dishes. That means one stored food can give you multiple possibilities. And that's exactly what you want in a serious stockpile. You're not simply storing one meal. You're storing an ingredient that can become many different foods. But there is one major requirement. You need a way to process and cook it. If you're storing whole wheat berries, consider having a manual grain mill or another appropriate method for grinding them. That way, you aren't completely dependent on electricity. Water is also essential. Wheat berries need proper preparation before eating, so your food storage plan should include safe drinking water and a reliable cooking method. Storage conditions are equally important. Wheat berries must be kept dry. Moisture can lead to mold and spoilage. Insects and rodents can also become a serious problem if the grain isn't protected. For extended storage, use appropriate food-grade airtight containers and established long-term grain storage methods. Keep the containers somewhere cool, dry, and dark. Avoid storing them in areas exposed to heat or large temperature changes. And don't assume that every type of wheat has exactly the same storage potential. Different varieties can have different characteristics. Choose a food-grade product specifically intended for consumption. One of the biggest advantages of wheat berries is that you can rotate them into everyday cooking. You don't have to wait for an emergency. Grind some into flour. Bake with it. Learn how your household likes it. Then replace what you use. That way, your stockpile isn't just sitting untouched. You're actually developing the skills needed to use it. Wheat berries earn the number 1 spot because they're versatile, compact compared with many finished foods, highly useful for making other staples, and capable of very long storage when properly packaged and protected. So there you have it. 15 foods worth considering for an exceptionally long-term pantry. Apple cider vinegar, white sugar, pure maple syrup, salt, honey, baking soda, whole black peppercorns, dry corn, dried beans, dried lentils, distilled white vinegar, cornstarch, dry pasta, white rice, and wheat berries. But remember, a long shelf life doesn't mean you should buy something and forget about it forever. Your storage conditions matter. Your packaging matters. And your ability to actually prepare the food matters. Build your stockpile gradually. Choose foods your household already eats. Protect dry goods from moisture and pests. Keep track of what you have. Rotate older supplies. And most importantly, learn how to use the foods you're storing. Because preparedness isn't just about having food. It's about having food you know how to turn into meals. Food you can store safely. And food your family will actually want to eat when fresh groceries aren't available. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Prepper Pulse and turn on notifications. We upload new videos daily with practical preparedness tips, grocery advice, food storage ideas, and emergency planning strategies to help you stay informed and ready. Stay prepared, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.